Okay, well, thank you, Jenny, for hosting me a second time for the parts 2 and 3 of the presentation. When I presented last, was it back in February? We only got through part 1. And just like when I presented in February, feel free to jump at any time so we can have a good discussion. This is a study group, so it's not formal. And, I actually improve the presentation based on feedback that I get, and I'll show where I actually made improvement based on our discussion back in February. So with that, the presentation has 3 parts. Or you could say 4 parts. There's preliminaries. Section 1 is just to counter talking points against peace. So we went over that in the previous meeting in February. And this month we'll talk about talking points for peace. You'd think that we don't need to explain why peace is good, but apparently we do, because otherwise we've had peace. We've had 73 years of war, so I guess we need to explain why peace is good. And section 3 is more for a Korean audience than for an American audience, but because what happens is Koreans especially, they so want reunification that they think peace and reunification are the same, and they're not the same. So we have to explain that and what's the difference and why there's even a difference. But before I go to section 2 and 3, I have since my last presentation, I did update the preliminary section. So I'd like to talk about that because basically I think you all know that in our society we all live off of sound bites. So it's important, they say the 8-second sound bite. So we have to know our 8-second sound bite regarding the Korean War. So I think we all know the Korean War erupted in 1950 on June 25th when North Korea invaded South Korea. And then a ceasefire or an armistice was signed on July 27, 1953. So a lot of people think that the war is effectively over, but it's not. So the talking point is that the bullets have mostly stopped flying, but the guns are still fully loaded, pointing at each other with a finger on the trigger, and the war can reignite at any time. It's very, very important. So the war is not practically over. It's not essentially over. It's not all but over. It's still a war. And members of the U.S. military who are serving in the DMZ in South Korea, they get paid combat pay. It's a real war. It's not, even though we have an armistice, so the bullets aren't flying, but it's still a war. The war's still going on, never ended. And and then next is what exactly are we talking about when we say peace with North Korea? All it means is that the U.S. and South Korea no longer wish to wipe North Korea off the map, and we recognize North Korea as a legitimate entity. So it does not mean that we approve of North Korea's human rights nor their nuclear weapons. And we talked about in the last. In our last discussion in February, how there are many countries that don't have the good human rights record, but we're not at war with them, and also countries that have developed nuclear weapons outside of the NPT, right, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and we're not at war with them, like India, Israel, Pakistan. So just because we're calling for peace does not mean that we approve of North Korea's weapons program. It just means that we no longer wish to wipe them off the map. And of course, after peace is achieved, North Korea and South Korea will be able to peacefully reunite in the future if both choose to do so. And that'd be that'd be section 3 of the presentation today. So with that, I'll just jump to page 11 to show where Jenny made a good point, and I want to show how I've incorporated this sub-bullet into the presentation, that North Korea is committed to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, as opposed to the denuclearization of North Korea, and could easily modify the constitution if they chose to denuclearize following a peace treaty. And then Jenny made the point that that commitment was of the denuclearization Kim Jong-un made in public to the North Korean population. So it's pretty serious. They're quite serious about that. So hopefully you can give me all good feedback so that we can make more improvements to the presentation. Okay, so section 2, the benefits of peace. I like to quote John Lennon and Yoko Ono. I think some of us are old enough to remember them. They have the song "Give Peace a Chance." So these are talking points for why we need to bring the Korean War to an end and bring peace to the Korean Peninsula. So this is kind of obvious, but apparently not obvious enough, that peace could reduce the possibility of the war accidentally reigniting, right? As long as there's war and the bullet just stop flying, there could be a situation in which the war could reignite without anybody even wanting it. What happened last year in 2022, North Korea adopted a new law that broadened the authorization for preemptive use of nuclear weapons. So this means that this could lead to the war reigniting without any party intentionally wanting to reignite the war. And notice I say reigniting as opposed to starting a new war, right? Because the war never ended. And it's important to understand that any decommissioned satellite, a satellite that ended its useful life and falls back to Earth, looks just exactly like an incoming intercontinental ballistic missile. So, and of course, there are hundreds of satellites that are orbiting the Earth since 1957. There's a lot of satellite. Mankind has launched a lot of satellites, including North Korea, by the way. And so, unless North Korea tracks them, they could mistake a falling satellite as an ICBM attack. So that's one thing that we should worry about. So that's why, if we end the war, that will reduce the likelihood that North Korea will suspect that falling satellite will look like an ICBM and then fire nuclear weapons preemptively. And then you may remember last November, North Korea test fired a missile that they directed 60 kilometers, which is 40 miles, off the coast of South Korea. So if they would have miscalculated, and instead of having their rocket land 60 kilometers off the coast of South Korea, it would have landed on South Korea territory on land, that could have reignited the war. So that's why it's very important to bring the war to an end, just so that we don't accidentally reignite the war.
Not to mention, I think in October 2022, there was also a missile launched by South Korea that went off target and in Gangwon province, I believe.
Oh, okay. Where did it land? I wasn't aware of that.
Fortunately, it didn't kill any civilians, but it was out of.
Oh, it landed inside South Korea?
Yeah, it was inside South Korea. Yeah.
Okay. So now at the I forgot what was the name of the speaker last month, but somebody asked the speaker last month at our study group. What was his name again, Jenny?
Dr.
Park?
Han S. Park.
Dr. Han Park. He talked about how the military-industrial complex, they benefit off the war. And I think it was Doug who asked, so how do we counter that? How do we, right? If there are people who benefit from the war, how can we say, hey, we can also benefit from peace? Well, we say that peace can bring prosperity, and it could actually usher in a new era of economic prosperity, because we're going to have to rebuild North Korea, right? North Korea is one of the poorest countries in the world, and we talked about how, because they spend so much on defense in the last, was it 2 months ago at the last study group. So we'll have to rebuild North Korea, and it will require an effort that would be similar to the effort required to rebuild Europe after the end of World War II, the Marshall Plan. So, and of course, you know that the Marshall Plan, rebuilding Europe, that brought about an era of economic prosperity, and because it really stimulated the economy. So we predict that this new economic boom could result in a new 21st century gold rush. That's how significant it would be. And basically, it would be such a boom that the 21st century could become known as the Pan-Pacific era, with Northeast Asia and the United States reaping the greatest benefits from this economic boom. Because it will have to rebuild North Korea, and also it'll open up North Korea as a new market for American companies too, right? Just like McDonald's entered the South Korean market and did very well in South Korea since 1988. There's a new market for them in North Korea if the war were to come to an end.
And I would like
So-
to add to that I think there would really have to be a dramatic shift in relations before North Korea would ever trust that kind of investment. I mean, if you look at the history of how investments happened in North Korea,
Well-
and the hesitancy
well-
to give over too much control to investors coming in. They've really, I mean, but I understand it's a big motivator for particularly Americans. That was Trump's whole marketing strategy to Kim Jong-un.
So this is a good segue into this page, which is that peace will bring foreign investment into North Korea. North Korea it really wants investment in their country, but the problem is that right now, with the state of the war, it's too risky to invest in North Korea because, well, the country is at war with the greatest superpower in the world. So there's too much risk of losing the investment due to war. Now, in South Korea, the South Korean government has an organization called the Inter-Korean Cooperation Fund, the IKCF, and that fund insures foreign investors against the risk of losses due to the state of war. North Korea, because they spend so much on their defense, so much of their I think it was 24% of their GDP on defense, they cannot offer similar insurance to foreign investors in case of war. And so if foreign investment could come in, and so we could start what we could do is we could start projects that have already been proposed but were shelved due to the war. So here I'm listing, like, I think, was it 5 of them? For example, the Rason, which is the region containing the 2 cities, Najing and Sonbong, and I'm probably completely butchering the Korean name, so my apologies. And if anybody wants to jump in and say the correct names, feel free. So there was, in the 90s, there was a plan to create a free economic zone development plan in those 2 cities, which was part of a larger effort to establish an international free economic zone to develop the area into a center of logistics and transportation in Northeast Asia. So it included the city of Vladivostok in Russia and Yanji in, so like this triangle, Yanji in China, along with the Rason here in, was it Chuang? So, and it was called the Tumen River Area Development Plan. Of course, the Tumen River is the river that separates North Korea from China from the Mount Baekdu eastwards, and with the last 11 miles of that river being a border with Russia. So that's one plan, that the North Koreans really wanted to develop that area, but they just couldn't get the foreign investment back in the 90s to help them develop it. Another idea is to reopen and expand the Kaesong Industrial Park, which is just north of the demilitarized border. And I'm sure many of you know that Kaesong actually used to be part of South Korea before the war, because it's just south of the 38th parallel, and the ceasefire put Kaesong north of the line. So the park was the brainchild of the founder of the Hyundai Group, and again, I'm going to butcher this name, Chung Ju-young, who went to North Korea in 1988 on I think it was a personal tour, and he proposed building a 16,000-acre industrial park in Kaesong, but to date, only 250 acres, which is less than 2% of that of the potential park, have actually been developed. So there's still 98% left to develop, right? And right now, it's even closed after some tensions with the Park Geun-hye government in 2016. As far as I know, it's been closed ever since. Another project is to to expand the city of Jeju in the west, to expand the port city to create a similar to in Rasan, to create a peace and cooperation zone and build an industrial complex there. And then another idea is there's a trans-Korean railway from the pre-1945, when the division of Korea. So we could put that back, reactivate it and connect it to the Trans-Siberian Railway, so that goods can flow from Korea all the way to Europe. And there's also an idea to connect the Trans-Asia highways, which would be a highway all the way from Japan, with a combination of a bridge and tunnel through the Korea Strait, through Korea, and then all the way to Turkey, right? So, of course, that idea cannot happen as long as the war continues. So that's yet another benefit of having peace. But it doesn't stop there. There's more. North Korea is full of natural and human resources that could be tapped if the war came to an end. So North Korea has lots of mineral resources. I'm showing here just this is just a representative picture of a mine, of a mineral mine. It's not necessarily from North Korea. So from what I've seen, there are 26 million tons of raw uranium ore reserves in North Korea, and that can yield over 15,000 tons of uranium that can be used for nuclear power plants. And they also have North Korea also has vast deposits of coal. We talked about uranium, manganese, and rare earth elements that with an approximate valuation of 6 trillion. And of course, those rare earth elements are indispensable to the high-tech industry and all our gadgets. So that's another useful thing, that another useful benefit that we can get from peace, that we could then tap in to all those minerals. And of course, selling those minerals will help North Korea get out of their status as being one of the poorest countries in the world. And of course, North Korea also has vast deposits of oil, which is estimated around 147 billion barrels. So that's the third largest reserve in the world. So if we could tap that, even though I know we all want to phase out of oil, but at least for the moment, we can't fully phase out. So that could also help both the world economy and the North Korean economy. And then in terms of human resources, North Korea is an expert at cyber warfare, but instead of fighting them, maybe they can help us improve cybersecurity worldwide. I don't know if you remember in 2014, after the release of the movie The Interview, which the North Koreans did not like because it showed a fictional assassination of their leader, they went and committed a cyber attack on Sony Pictures that released that film as a reprisal for the release of the film. So rather than have us fight us on the cyber front, if they can help us build better cyber defense tools, that would also be useful, because there's no better person to develop cyber defense tools than a cyber criminal, right? Those are the best people to help us fight cyber crime.
On that point, it reminds me of when I worked with kids with I would work with kids with behavioral challenges in schools, and you'd find the kids who didn't have opportunities to express their behaviors or their desires or their needs in appropriate ways would turn to ways that really disrupted the classroom. And so if North Korea continues to remain economically isolated by the international population, the international community, they're going to have a hard time using their skills in ways that are going to be helpful and contribute to society, to the international community as a whole. But we could welcome them in.
Yeah, so I wouldn't want to compare North Korea to an angry child, but I understand your point. Yeah, so I think it it would be insulting to them if they heard you. But your point is taken. That
My point is my point is that I never saw the angry child as the problem. My point was I
Yeah.
was seeing the classroom and the dynamics and the things that needed to be shifted
right.
so that that child could succeed there. So that's just something that I observe on a micro scale.
Right. So
Thanks for that.
So yeah, so as long as the work continues, it's perfectly legitimate for them to fight us on the cyber front, right? Because the armistice only says that the bullets won't fly, but they can certainly attack us on the cyber, right? When back in 1953 there was no cyber attacks, right? There was no internet in 1953. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So next one is that. Peace will give peace will give us leverage over North Korea, because we want North Korea to stop. We talk about how we don't approve of their nuclear weapons and human rights, so we want we want them to change. But as long as the war is continuing, North Korea, just like any other self-respecting country, they're not going to yield to the pressure of to any pressure while guns are pointed at them, right? So it's just like we do not negotiate with kidnappers, right? We want them to stop, because if we negotiate with kidnappers, then basically it encourages more kidnapping. So North Korea developed nuclear weapons as a deterrent against U.S. invasion and the toppling of their regime in Pyongyang. So why would they give up their nuclear weapons as long as the war continues, right? So it doesn't make sense to put denuclearization as a condition for peace. First come peace, then we can talk denuclearization. And then, of course, once the threat of an invasion is removed, North Korea would be more, as we said, more willing to negotiate denuclearization and improvement in human rights in exchange for foreign aid and cooperation. So right now, all we have is a stick, right? Because we have guns pointed at North Korea, and our stick is like we can pull the trigger. So instead of having a stick, we can use carrots, and that is economic aid and cooperation. Of course, we do offer them aid and cooperation, but at the same time, we're pointing guns at them. So of course, that's why our offers for aid and cooperation are not taken very seriously, so long as the guns are pointed at them. Okay. And then peace will also allow South Korea to become a fully independent country. Now, what do I mean by that? Because it is an independent country, but I'm saying that it's not fully independent, because the continuing state of the war makes South Korea dependent on the U.S. to the point that it cannot be called a fully independent country. That even though South Korea maintains its own military, command of the South Korean military shifts to the U.S. in the event of active fighting. So just so you understand, so instead of the president of South Korea being in charge of his or her own military, it's the president of the U.S. sitting in the White House that controls the South Korean military in the event of active fighting. And this was established in the 1953 South Korean-U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty. So, of course, I'm sure the South Koreans would love to have control over their own military and not give it to someone sitting in Washington whom they cannot elect. And the Korean Air Force and Navy cannot even function independently of the U.S. They're totally dependent on the U.S. And South Korea has tried. They've set goals to reduce the dependence on the U.S. military. I think in the Lee Myung-bak administration, they set 2011 as the goal or something. But basically, they have not been able to achieve that because of the continuing state of war. So the only hope for South Korea to become fully independent and not rely on the U.S. For its protection and be able to have full control over its military is to have peace. As long as the state of war continues, no matter how much South Korea tries, it's probably not going to be able to shake that clause in the Mutual Defense Treaty that shifts the command of the South Korean military to the U.S. in case of active fighting. next benefit of peace is that peace could complete the transformation of South Korea into a fully democratic country. So the first 39 years of South Korea was a succession of dictatorship, and although the South Koreans scored significant accomplishments by transforming their country in 1987 from dictatorship regimes into a stable and functioning democracy, we can still see to this day remnants of the dictatorial regimes in South Korea. There's the 1948 National Security Act that's been on the books ever since 1948 that restricts freedom of speech. So, for example, if you go waving a North Korean flag on the streets of Seoul, that is considered a criminal offense because it's seen because North Korea is seen as an illegitimate entity that is dedicated to destroying South Korea. So I can understand why South Korea is doing that, because is to protect itself. They view that waving a North Korean flag is an act of betrayal. But what it is, it's a restriction of speech, right? It's like here in the U.S. we have. There were proposals to add a flag burning amendment to the United States Constitution because they said, oh, this is reprehensible speech, but it didn't pass because the decision was even reprehensible speech should be protected. So in the event of in the case of South Korea and the war, they cannot say, okay, we are going to allow reprehensible speech of waving a North Korean flag, the flag of the enemy, on our territory, right? So it's only peace could eliminate that restriction of freedom of speech. And there's also restriction of freedom of movement, that South Korean citizens are forbidden from traveling to North Korea because traveling is seen as a potential espionage against South Korea. Not only that, South Koreans are not even allowed to go to the DMZ. I was in South Korea in 2011. Because I'm not a South Korean citizen, I was able to tour the DMZ. The U.S. and South Korea, they've made the DMZ a tourist attraction in the middle of a war zone, right? They made it a tourist attraction, but only for foreigners, not for South Koreans. So only peace can lift those remnants of the old dictatorial regimes with restriction of freedom of speech and restriction on the freedom of movement. So with that, if there are no questions, I can go to the next section, which is for peaceful coexistence before reunifications. Are there any questions? Okay.
I was curious when you were talking about transfer of operational control of the military, if anyone here in our group is aware of those ongoing conversations in South Korea under the current administration.
I can't imagine that the current administration would be interested in that because part of his campaign, Yoon Suk-yeol said that he wants more cooperation with the U.S. and Japan. So why would he want to reduce that reliance? But I think, was it Moon Jae-in and previous administration, I think Lee Myung-bak and maybe No Moo-young, they tried to do it, but I can't even fathom Yoon Suk-yeol wanting to reduce that dependence on the U.S. military.
And then I was also curious. I think I have been to the DMZ with South Koreans, so I'm not sure what the laws are around that.
It must be dual citizens. If they're dual citizens, U.S. South Korea, then it's okay. But South Koreans cannot.
They're not dual citizens. Maybe it's different in different spots along the DMZ.
Yeah, because I thought there's tours there, and I thought that South Koreans are not allowed to go to the DMZ, that it's only for foreigners or Koreans with foreign passports.
They were not holding foreign passports. This was in Gosong though.
Yeah.
So it was over on the east.
Okay, maybe. Yeah, they Panmunjom, where I went, they check passports and they want to see foreign passports. South Korean passports are not valid, or at least they weren't in 2011 when I was there.
A few comments on this section.
Okay.
So right on the slide before where Jenny was mentioning about the independence or the independence section, what Jenny has mentioned, the OpCon, I think that's like one good point that kind of rounds up the independence issue. If you would mention the word wartime operation control, that South Korea does not have it, kind of sums up the whole point.
Oh, the OpCon?
Yeah, if you mentioned OpCon.
Okay.
And another point I wanted to make, there was, and I think this is something Casey Choi organized in 2019. There was some sort of like inter-Korea Kaesong industrial complex being introduced to the US Congress people.
Wait, what happened in 2019?
Yeah, there was some sort of presentation to the US Congress about Kaesong industrial complex.
Okay.
And I think that'll be a good point if we were talking to the member of Congress that like this was done in the US Congress.
Okay, I guess I have to find out more about it because I know that South Koreans really like having South Korean companies really like that Kaesong industrial complex because you have great labor force at a much Lower rate than in South Korea, and they're just an hour away from Seoul.
Yeah.
So South Korean executives would travel an hour, do business, come back home, and pay much lower labor rates there, and it's even lower than Vietnam or China. So it's really beneficial to the South Koreans. Of course, with peace, they'd have to raise the wages, but nonetheless, it's still a great source of labor.
Echo, do you happen to know what the purpose of that presentation to the Congress was? Was it to induce American investment or?
I don't remember clearly, but this is something that Casey Choi mentioned in the past, how he organized.
I can ask him.
Yeah, South Korean businessmen and maybe like legislators, South Korean legislators to visit the US Congress.
So as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, the industrial park has been closed to 2016, and there's a liaison office there that in 2020 the North Koreans blew up. Yeah. Right. So, and of course,
the liaison office was that wasn't built with the Kaesong Industrial Park, right? That was built during the détente with during the Trump North Korea talks. I could be wrong there. That was my understanding.
As far as I know, it was built. It's in the complex. It was built with South Korean money because the North Koreans would not blow up their own building, so they blew up a South Korean building. As far as I know.
Excuse me, have you ever met Dr. Kim Jin-young, who is Kim Jin-young. He's the director. I don't know what's the official the title, but he is the one director of Kaesong Industry, and he knows every bit of the plan and then history and then what's upcoming, and so he'll be super. And yeah, so I hope you meet him. Yeah.
Do you know him, Shinhwa?
Yes.
Do you know him, Shinhwa?
No, but I love to watch his presentation.
Oh, he's coming to the US in June.
Great.
Yeah, I'll post
for
it.
What plan? For what plan? For
yeah, I think he's gonna do a series of lectures.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's the one about the Kaesong industry.
Jenny, if you need the Kim Jin-young's contact, let me know. June 15 committee had their June seminar.
Great.
Kim Jin-young, so on. If you need, let me know.
Thank you, Subo.
With regard to Jenny's question about the OpCon transfer, there's an article in Korea Times from 2022 that basically says, let me read one paragraph towards the end. It says, the issue of returning wartime operational control to South Korea should depend on factors that are the most effective in winning war, President Yoon said, And in an interview with the Voice of America in May of last year, he said South Korea lacks sufficient readiness to operate intelligence assets, which are essential to in commanding a wartime operation. And basically, it was saying earlier in the article that the plan to shift OPCON authority to South Korea was put off for a number of reasons, including COVID-19, as well as not having sufficiently large cooperative operations to assess South Korea's readiness to take on OPCON. So they're trying to plan events that will allow South Korea's capabilities fully to be tested in that regard, but it seems like it's not going to happen anytime soon.
All right.
Thanks for
They're
that,
not
Doug.
ready for that. Thank you.
I think that it was interesting because I remember hearing about that as well, but I hadn't heard much about it. But I do know that the Yoon government has been ramping up the size of the military exercises, but I didn't know if that was explicitly with desire to transfer operational control in mind.
Yeah.
Well, from what Doug said, it sounds like there's no such desire.
At this point, right.
Yeah, right. Which is what I guessed based on what I know about Yoon and his philosophy.
And you know what they say publicly may be very different from what they say privately. So
I don't
he's
think
putting
that's the case for you.
yeah, he's putting a public face saying the U.S. is in charge and we're fine with that until we can show that we can take care of ourselves. But there's no rush in that regard.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't want to talk about Yoon too much, but yeah.
That reminds me of Subok's poem.
El, I love to hear that you talked about economic prosperity once the North Korea is accepted, and that's wonderful. But on the other hand, I'm pretty much worried about whether capitalism or socialism or communism, the economic system and running system would be quite different. And I hope capitalism not manipulate their way to gain their profits, just pouring money to North Korea. And North Korea is very much sensitive about that. And they run their own system. And I hope before they they accept, they do. And then I hope they have some kind of a compromised whatever rules and then policies among them, I mean, two sides, so that nobody exploit that economic profits for economic prosperity. I'm a bit worried about the capitalism, the way they handle.
Well, no country is purely capitalistic or purely socialist. Even here in the United States, we think of ourselves as capitalists, but we got Medicare and Social Security and now Obamacare. Specific to your question, look at China and Vietnam. They're not purely communist. They've reformed to have some capitalistic elements. So I think what North Korea wants, and again, I cannot speak on behalf of North Korea. I've never been there, never talked to them. But from what I can see, what North Korea wants is to imitate the model in Vietnam and China and reform their economy so that they're not going to be poor and starving, yet keep their values that they have and maintain that, right? Just like it's not as if in Vietnam they smashed all statues of Ho Chi Minh, right? I don't think North Korea wants to smash all the statues of Kim Il-sung.
Doug, did you have something to add? Or sorry, Xinhua in case Xinhua wants to respond first.
Well, the North Korea is very sensitive, and then in order to keep their own self-reliance, even though they cooperate, they could open up to cooperate with outside resources to build up their country. So it's quite different from, I think, Vietnam. And somehow I like the North Korea, the way they handle really strong in their self-reliance and for 70 years, that's the way they build up. And so I don't know how the outside the countries, how it will work, especially South Korea, capitalism, and they always love to get benefit without having corporate kind of reciprocal relationship. So
think-
that's what I'm worried about. I love to see the economic prosperity.
I think you make a really strong point, Shinhua, that if there's not clear understanding of both systems and respect for both systems, it would be very hard to not have a new outbreak of conflict because there would be inevitable misunderstandings. Doug.
Yeah, I was just going to say that my friend who is teaching international relations at Hankook University for Foreign Studies wrote or edited a volume probably 7 or 8 years ago that he had me edit for English language, and he had he and his partner in the editing had essays by Chinese scholars, Russian scholars, American scholars, and Korean scholars talking about what would happen once the war ended and the two Koreas opened up to each other and North Korea opened up to the rest of the world. And one of the things, I edited the Russian translations and also the Chinese translations. And in both cases, they said that once North Korea stopped being the hermit nation, both of those nations would seek opportunities to enter North Korea and perhaps offer North Korea better deals than the United States or South Korea did. But North Korea would be sitting basically in the catbird seat, being able to choose its partners for industrial development and that kind of thing. And because of their long animosity towards the United States and South Korea, they might well choose offers from Russia and China over those from the United States and South Korea. So that needs to be a possibility that is considered rather than just assuming that they'll, want to reunite with South Korea and favor South Korean and American companies.
Right. Yeah, I agree that there'd be a lot of competition for all the minerals that North Korea has, and they're not necessarily go with the U.S. companies, but I'm sure the U.S. companies can offer the sweetest deals.
Echo, what do you have to contribute? Sorry, go ahead, Al.
Yeah, because they have so much resources, so I think they can offer North Korea the sweetest deals. But of course, who knows? Well, we'd have to find out, right?
What do you have to contribute, Echo?
Right. So to this talking point, although it might sound attractive to a capitalist or to like Americans, I think if a North Korean or people like Shinhwa who have studied about North Korea and know North Korea very well, they might be offended on this talking point because it may sound like the capitalists will be like exploiting. Once the war ends, we're gonna go into North Korea and like do all this stuff, but that is from like capitalistic point of view. So I think maybe reconsider this talking point. And one other thing that I wanted to measure, I wasn't sure whether it was gonna come later, but maybe talking about South Korea economy would be a better talking point because of the current war. Sometimes the investment, pulled out in 2017 when there was a fire and fury, right? So South Korea economy, they are already capitalist, but some of their economics are kind of unstable because of the war. So maybe talking about South Korean economic, how it'll stable South Korea might be a better talking.
Right. So I don't think anybody should take this as exploitation. I would say maybe think of North Korea as potentially like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Dubai, that they were able to use their natural resources to become wealthy countries. So if anybody sees that as exploitation, they definitely shouldn't. It's like the West, we would be able to get all those minerals, but of course, the expectation is that North Korea would be compensated for that, and I think we want to be
thinking about the South Korea economic system and the way they manage is very much for more upper class people rather than sharing with the common people. That's the Korean economic system is running now.
Right,
It's been especially.
And I
And
don't-
so if they use, if they use that method and that way, policy, then they just buy the land and then bring the money and then, hey, this is ours. And I don't think they'll share that profits together. And then they, in the beginning, they have to really have some kind of corporate policy. Otherwise, I'm a bit worried about.
So yeah, so
I'll-
notice that the title here is not to exploit North Korea, but to open up North Korea's natural and human resources, right? So it'd be open to the West, not for exploitation.
Yeah,
And
I
I
think
wouldn't, I also wouldn't bring up South Korean economy as a benefit to ending the war, because obviously the South Koreans were able to create the miracle on the Han while the war was going on, right? So what we say about South Korea is that it will allow them to be a fully independent country and also allow them to be a fully democratic country, not improve their economy, because South Korea is already the 10th largest economy in the world, right? 10th largest in the top 10. So,
but their economy was destabilized with some of their
Okay.
relationship with China has been destabilized as a result of the war and the ongoing militarization in the South. But I think this point is really kind of raising some of the friction that exists. This would be a very appealing slide potentially to investors, to Americans who are thinking of this as an opportunity, as a financial opportunity, but it may not be as appealing to North Koreans because of the ideology. And this is one of the places where we need to grow understanding, where maybe Americans need to deepen their understanding of the Korean system as well. What did you have to contribute, Doug? Sorry, go ahead, Al.
It's important to note that this Rasan Free Economic Zone that was proposed in the 1990s, it's something that the North Koreans wanted foreign investment, but they couldn't attract the foreign investment because of the war, because foreign investors are shy about the risk due to the war, right? That it can all be, their investment can disappear due to the war.
In part, that was the reason they couldn't attract a lot of investment, but there's also the way it was managed, and you can look at that because it does sort of they managed it in such a way that was based on their principles, not on the principles of the rest of the way a lot of the rest of the world would manage a project like that. So that's something that I think investors will be wary of as well.
They did do a lot of reforms of their. They actually passed laws to try to encourage investors, right? So the investors told them what they'd like to see, and they basically tried as best they could to bend over backwards to satisfy the investment, but ultimately they couldn't assure them of any losses against the war.
Yeah, I would refer people to Quest for Peace if you haven't read it yet. It's Dr. Hunchik Park's book, because he does talk a lot about the idea of what he calls epistemic imperialism, which is like the imperialism of the way that we think, where we understand a system, we understand North Korea's system based on what we know and expect. And if we want to truly relate to North Korea on their terms, we have to understand the way they there needs to be mutual understanding of both systems. So, but I'll toss it over to Doug.
What was the
I was just going to say that one caveat from the Vietnam experience is that because it was a one-party rule and basically you had to be in with the party to have any authority at all, one of the things that they established was if you were going to have business in Vietnam, you had to partner with a existing Vietnamese company so that you weren't independent. And when I was there, I saw Mercedes-Benz factory. There was a huge factory in Ho Chi Minh City, a bunch of other names of Western corporations, but all of them had to be in cooperative relationship with Vietnamese business people. So it's likely that in North Korea, they would have something similar, a requirement that anybody coming in had to be partnered with a North Korean business person or whatever, and those would be among the elites, who were already had an in with the leadership.
Yeah, I mean, this is no different than us in the United States, where last year we and this is something controversial in South Korea. We created tax incentives for electric vehicles, but there's strings attached in which they have to have a plant in the United States in order to create American jobs. So the reason it's controversial in South Korea is that Kia and Hyundai don't have those plants, so they're at a disadvantage. So just like what you're saying, that of course each country wants to reap its benefits. And to Jenny's point, what we call the North Korean system. Remember, this is North Korean system under the war, right? So once the war is once there's no longer war, they will definitely reform their system because they won't need everything they have that they've used and frankly efficiently to survive the war, right? So far, North Korea, we talked about this at the previous section back in February, that North Korea's outlived the Soviet Union, right? So they're already 75 years. Soviet Union only lasted for 70 years, 72 years. So whatever, their system has worked for them, obviously, very well. So that's why when the North Korean system will change once there's a war, once the war ends.
It could be, I mean, that could very well be the case, but I don't know in what ways it will change.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it'll change, especially when we condition aid and assistance with human rights reform. It'll definitely have to change. So, and I'm sure it will. So I think with that, let's. So maybe we should move on to section 3 about. We can't hear you, Shinhwa.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so this is mostly for Korean audiences. For before we can have a reunification, we need to have peaceful coexistence. So I think you all know the reunification flag. Now this flag doesn't exist. This is a Photoshop image in which I put an olive branch across the peninsula to show division, yet peaceful division. So why is it that we can't just reunify after the war ends? So basically, I've been looking for a quote, and I couldn't find a quote, so I had to quote myself, which is, "No Korean heart will ever be whole and complete until Korea is reunified." And it's motivated by, I'm Jewish from Israel, and the Jewish people did not have a homeland for 2,000 years. But we never gave up on the dream of having a homeland. And in the Bible, we actually have this expression that if I forget Jerusalem, let me forget my right hand. Or if I forget Jerusalem, that my tongue will stick to my to the roof of my palate, to my palate, if I forget Jerusalem. So similar to that, I didn't want to directly plagiarize the Bible, so that's why I put this. The point is that Koreans should always strive towards reunification, because the division was imposed on the Koreans. It was not something that they chose, but nonetheless, the road to reunification will be long and difficult. So why do we need peaceful coexistence before reunification? Because in addition to rebuilding North Korea, in order to bring the living standards in North Korea to a level similar to that of South Korea, we also have to answer many difficult questions. For starters, what do you call the country? Because even though in English the two countries have the same name, Korea, but not in the native language. In Korean, North Korea calls itself Joseon, which is the name of the Korean nation that existed for 505 years, from 1392 to 1897. But in South Korea, they call themselves Daehan, which is the name of their nation from 1897 to 1910, for 13 years. It was Daehan Jaeguk, and now they're Daehan Mingguk. So obviously, what do you call them, right? Just and that's like a minor thing, just a name, right? I can point out that the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia had to use the name Fyrom, former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, because Greece, their neighbor to the south, objected to the name Macedonia. So it took them 25 years to arrive at the name North Macedonia instead of Macedonia. So I don't know how long it'll take the Koreans to figure out what to call themselves, but it's not trivial. That's the point. And then, of course, there's a difficult question of how to acknowledge the role of Kim Il-sung in Korean history, because South Korea does not recognize him at all, whereas North Koreans treat him almost godlike. So would a reunified Korea celebrate? Tomorrow is April 15th, but tomorrow is already today on the Korean Peninsula. So April 15th in South Korea is just an ordinary day, but in North Korea, they call it the Day of the Sun, and it's a major public holiday. So will a unified Korea celebrate it, or will it just be another day? Well, of course, here in the United States, it's tax day. So, and of course, I'm not Korean, so I can't tell the Koreans what to do, right? They'd have to figure it out for themselves, and of course, it'll take a lot of negotiations. And then, what are you going to do? You're going to erect more giant statues of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il in cities like Seoul and Busan, or are you going to remove those giant statues from the cities of Pyongyang and Kaesong, right? It's something to figure it out. And then you're going to keep Kim Il-sung on the banknotes. I should probably remove that because fewer and fewer people use banknotes these days. Right now, it's all electronic currency. But the point, nonetheless, is it's a major discrepancy that the North Koreans view Kim Il-sung as their savior. The South does not. So that's obviously a big thing to consider as a reunified country. And then would the Korean reunification end up like in the German reunification, which North Korea would be absorbed into South Korea? So it's impossible to tell what exactly a reunified Korea would look like, but there's one thing for sure, and that is that North Korea has something to offer South Korea, which is to hit the reset button on the relations with Japan. North Korea never reconciled with Japan since the occupation of Korea from 1910 to 1945. On the other hand, South Korea was heavily pressured in 1965 by the US, because the US wanted to create an anti-communist front of US, Japan, South Korea against the communist front of China, USSR, and North Korea. So the US heavily pressured the South Korea to forgive Japan. So under that pressure, South Korea basically allowed Japan off the hook by not requiring Japan to acknowledge the war crimes they'd committed during the occupation, nor pay any meaningful reparations. And then of course, what the U.S. did is they actually exploited Park Chung-hee, who was the president at the time, to normalize the relations, and he was a collaborator, which the South Koreans have that that epithet called Chinilpa, right? Not exactly a nickname, right? It's not exactly a compliment, right? It's an insult for all the Japanese collaborators. So they exploited the fact that during the 1930s he was actually collaborating with the Japanese. And then to add insult to injury, his daughter in 2015, who was serving as president of South Korea, she again let Japan off the hook with another agreement to pay very, very symbolic, nothing meaningful compensation for the victims of the sex slavery, which is called comfort women. So that is something that North Korea can offer South Korea. So that's why I can't see how a reunified Korea will just be North Korea being absorbed into South Korea, because North Korea has something. This is something very valuable that North Korea has to offer to South Korea. Okay. So next, and this is my last slide. Why can't North and South Korea reunify the same way East and Germany reunified? So there are 5 reasons. First, and is obvious, East Germany and West Germany never went to war against each other. And not only did the 2 Koreas fight a bitter war against each other, the war never ended. So it's now lasted well over 70 years. We're coming up on 73 years. And Germany was only divided for 45 years, but Korea has now been divided for 75 years. So the differences between the German people on 2 sides did not grow as large as the differences have grown for the Korean people on 2 sides. And East Germany did not have a cult of personality that North Korea has developed. The East Germans never viewed their leaders as saviors and liberators from a ruthless occupation that the way the North Koreans have. Because Kim Il-sung actually entered Korea in the final days of World War II, and of course he takes credit for the liberation, ignoring the fact that we dropped a couple of bombs on Japan, and also in the I believe it was the 1937, he had a military victory with the Battle of Bochombo. So of course, in North Korea it's glorified. In South Korea, high school students graduate never learning about the Battle of Bochombo, but in North Korea, it's glorified as if it's the biggest military victory in modern history. So, and then, so that leads to the differences, right? The different culture, different mentality. And then East Germany never became a nuclear state, so the German reunification never had to address the question what to do with East Germany's nuclear weapons, right? So that's why their reunification was simpler. And of course, it's worth noting that the U.S. actually had diplomatic relations with East Germany for 16 years before the German reunification, right? The U.S. established diplomatic relations with East Germany in 1973, and the reunification happened 16 years later. And we've never formed diplomatic relations with North Korea. So I don't know how long it's going to take to after the U.S. ends the war and forms diplomatic relations with North Korea that the two Koreas can reunify. So I don't know if it's going to take 6 years, 16 years, or 60 years. I don't know. But the point is that we got to start the diplomatic relations right away in order to start the clock ticking. That's what's important. We got to do it right now, just so that we can set the road to reunification. As long as there's war, there won't be reunification. And I want to show in the appendix, I have this is a very powerful image here. The last page here. I want to take a look. This is Berlin from space, not 2019. So some 30 years after reunification. You can see West Berlin has white streetlights because they use more efficient fluorescent lamps. But you can see East Berlin and all the suburbs that used to be part of East Germany still have the less efficient sodium vapor lights. So this is just shows a scar 30 years after reunification. You can still see visible scars in Berlin. So just imagine how hard it'll be to heal from the division of Korea. That after 30 years, there's still visible scars in the German reunification. I'm sure it's going to take 60, 100 years to heal the scars from the Korean reunification. But we got to start it right now. And the first step is to end the war and bring peace. And that's the end.
I think you've put so much hard work, Al, into developing this. And have you been able to use this with representatives already that you've met with?
I sent it to them, and none of them wanted to talk to me.
Sounds about
So
right.
actually, I didn't send them all pages. I sent them like 5 key pages, and none of them wanted to talk to me. The only one who responded was I had there's a congressman from Cincinnati, Brad Weinstrup, I think. And his office responded with, oh, Otto Warmbier was a constituent. We don't want to hear about that. And so I responded with, yeah, that was a tragedy, but that should not be an excuse to continue a war that started 50 years before he was born. Didn't respond to that.
I think there's a lot of good feedback that will come. So Subak, why don't you lead us out on that last section?
Okay, I don't want to interrupt, but everything completed. I want to ask a question.
Go ahead. I'm done with the presentation. Go ahead.
All right. I want to challenge Al one point. You said North Korea invaded South Korea. That's what I believed the past 70 years, maybe 60 years. I believed so. They taught that way in South Korea. I believed. However, now I changed it because first, I learned history a little bit that year, 1950, and Korea divided in 1945, everybody knows. And North Korean government established in 1948, September. South Korea, a little earlier, a few months earlier, 1948, August 15, I believe. South
That's
Korean
right, August
government
15,
established.
1948.
Yeah. And from that point, August 15, 1948 to June 25, 1950, about 3 years period. That's what, how many days? About 1,000 days. The history, the recording shows every night there's a fighting between South and North Korea. Not only once, maybe 2 wars, 2 fightings every night, sometimes few days of no fighting. Big fighting was Haeju. South Korea, the maneuver, the tank and the vessel. The Haeju is a port. Now North Korea, but at the time, the Haeju is below 38th parallel. And they took a tank and the vessels and they occupied, I don't know, maybe 10 miles further, 38th the parallel northbound, maybe a week. I don't remember exactly. And they killed the lots of North Korean people. That's one example. And there are many in the Western Korea. More than 1,000 fighting 3 years period. Then 1947, Daegu, and 1948, Jeju. Jeju, 1/5 of the Jeju population killed, 1948. They said communist. They are not communist. So let's say North Korean view, their brother and sister killed in South innocently. And North Korean leader may think how to save the poor people killed in South. Another thing, North Korea and South Korea confronted through 38th parallel. All division commander of a northern part coming from the Chinese in China, they fought against Japan. Their friends killed and they survived and they came to Korea and they are defending North Korea against South and US attack. In the meantime, you said 친일파 collaborators, domestically Korea, but lots of them in China, they fought each other. And the 친일파 and 친일파 became South Korean commander along the 38th parallel. So the location changed from China to 38th parallel. And 1,000 times of fighting. Any minute, bigger fighting happened. I believe that is so-called Korean War, June 25, 1950. So before, while I was in Korea, I believed while they taught me, North Korea invaded. But now I changed my mind through the fact and new history. So I hope you change next time. Don't say invaded South Korea, North Korea invaded South Korea. That's my first challenge. And I'm sorry, talking too low, it's okay? Talking.
Al,
It's up to Jenny. She's the host.
Al, did you have a response to that? Because
Yes, I do.
Yeah, go ahead and respond to that,
so-
and then we'll go back to Subal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Okay. So North Korea invaded South Korea. There's no doubt about that. However, that's not necessarily mean there was a hostile act, because Jeju, as you said, there was, so South Korea was massacring communist sympathizers. So North Korea had every right to help their South Korean brothers, the communists in the South. You're right that basically South Korea became a haven for all the Chinilpas, all the Japanese collaborators, and the communists were seen as the enemy because we wanted them to be enemy, because the Cold War had already started. And of course, the only reason that that Kim Il-sung invaded South Korea as opposed to Syngman Rhee invading North Korea is because Syngman Rhee couldn't. And of course, the border was not tranquil. There were a lot of cross-border intrusions. So absolutely, but it was not a massive scale. So yes, the border was not tranquil. So that's why, and I actually have another talk. I don't know if Jenny wants me to invite me to another lecture, but yeah, about the history of how the Korean War started. So yeah, you're right that even though North Korea did invade South Korea, we cannot deny that it was not necessarily a hostile act. It was a preemptive act as opposed to a hostile act, because Syngman Rhee would have loved to do it himself, but he couldn't.
Syngman Rhee said, I will have a lunch in Pyongyang and a dinner at the Siniju. So Syngman Rhee.
But he just couldn't do it. He didn't. His army was not strong enough to do it. Whereas
they are busy. The Syngman Rhee's army, Chinilpa, are busy drinking at night and looking around. The girls, women, they are so corrupted, and they are confiscating the properties from patriot, South Korean patriot. They are stealing. They took away. They are busy every day.
The version Subok just shared is not much known to many Koreans. Only those who knows that story, they know. And it was the situation that much provocative. And then,
so I
as
hope
Subok said, as Subok said, there are so many fights regionally. And also the South Korea with United States, whatever the soldiers, they attacked provocatively. So yes, we have learned that yes, North Korea invaded. That's the fact throughout the 70 years. Right, but the story is more knowing that what Subok has described, then I think the also angle could be changed too. Because when two parties, when one person is provocative, eventually the person has to do something, right? So that's typical. So we have to know what factors are there at that time. Not simply, okay, North Korea, communist, they invaded. I don't think that's only the line fact.
So yeah, obviously everything is nuanced and more details, but this presentation is all about talking points. So that's why I didn't go through history. But you're correct that there was a lot of the border was not tranquil. There was a lot of cross fighting, and actually, in our book, we propose a theory that the United States actually left South Korea to leave it vulnerable, and it kind of as a bait for Kim Il-sung, so we can go in and basically bomb the crap out of them. And we almost did. We almost eliminated North Korea until China came in and saved them. So yeah, so basically we left it kind of like, you put a mousetrap and you put bait on it. We left South Korea as a bait so that North Korea will enter, so we can basically eliminate North Korea with brutal force.
Okay, second one quickly.
Doug, did you want to respond to that point, or are you asking a separate question before we move on to Subok's next point?
Second one, separate one.
I could respond to two things. One is I saw a documentary on the Jeju massacre some years ago that the Asian group at the University of Chicago sponsored, and basically the point they were making was that the Jeju people were trying to establish their independence from Korea and they were very nationalistic, but they were interpreted by the Syngman Rhee administration as being resisting South Korean authority, and therefore they were cast as communists. And there were anti-communist, what the documentary called thugs, who had come from North Korea, had fled to South Korea, and not only the South Korean army attack on the Jeju, but they also these non-military thugs were sent down to Jeju to push back on the desire for independence of the Jeju people, of the nationalistic people. So it was more nationalism that sparked the resistance of the Jeju people against South Korean government, but they were cast as communist, and that gave South Korea the cover to be able to attack them as though they were just resisting a communist uprising in Jeju. So apart from that, there was the cross-border fighting was symbolic also of the political unrest, because there were several political groups that were trying to establish predominance on the Korean Peninsula. One of them, I don't remember the leader, but you probably, Sobok or Shinwa probably know who he was. He had something called Unitary Something, and he actually was a very popular politician in the time between the end of the war against Japan and the start of the Korean War.
Yohunyoung, you're talking about Yohunyoung.
Yes, absolutely. And yet he didn't have, and he had a great following in Korea, but he didn't have the political wherewithal to overcome either the communists and those that allied themselves with the communists, or those that allied themselves with the US and the Japanese sympathizers. So in hearing about him and hearing about what he had proposed, really establishing Korea as an independent nation that had no political alignments outside of itself, it was so sad to me to hear that he had been assassinated, and that he didn't establish this unitary socialism that he had developed so thoroughly.
Yeah, I think he's one of only maybe the only 20th century Korean leader that's admired on both sides of the border.
All right,
Or
just before,
line.
great stuff. Before we go back to Subok, I know that we're almost at the half hour. So if people need to leave, Al, if you need to leave, we're going to respect your time.
I can stay till another 5 hours. Doesn't matter to me.
All right. So if anyone needs to go, please do. Next month we will be having Professor Joseph Yee coming to share with us, and he'll be talking about. It should be interesting. He's going to be talking about some things that'll be related to the travel ban, as well as how we can be communicating, particularly to those who tend to oppose progressive ideas. So that'll be hopefully good. So we welcome you all back for that. Watch your emails. And
sounds like more talking points you'll give us.
Yes, it could be. Which Echo has made a very fair and good point, which we should follow up with. This is a resource that Al has developed for us to use. So please, let's use it. Let's be reaching out, as Al has been doing, to our legislators. Let's be talking to them, because I think he has done a good job at targeting it to an American leadership sort of audience. And we'll see how we go with this. Subok has a question, and then we'll hop over to Doug. And if you need to go, please feel free.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I have nothing more to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug. My second one is, we need a time to rebuild North Korea in order to bring living standard in North Korea to a level similar to that of South Korea.
Okay.
It sounds great. However, to me, it won't happen, because let's say North Korea developed, level went high. Few decades, North Korean living standard higher than South Korea. We never know. I was in Korea. We always thought North Korea poor, they are beggar, always. Much later, we realized that North Korea living standard much higher than South Korea up to 1980. So this competition never happened. You know, one guy is lower. They say, "Oh, I want to be higher." Never happened. Equality between two Koreas, and also that same level is important, but that is not must. The living standard is important. However, the the capitalistic ruler and the North Korean socialistic ruler, much different. GDP, there is a North Korean GDP, and North Korea provide house, education, the hospital free. They are not including in the GDP. I don't know much about it. However, their calculation, their rule, big different. So if we are trying to make a same, it won't happen. And also, it's not that much important. As I said, the heart is more important in reunification. And I'm sure South Korean people and North Korean people ready to reconcile the difference. So many guys don't want unification. There are many guys, as you said, 친일파. 친일파, once reunified, they lose their position. They are living, they are very well because based upon all the false knowledge, false teaching. If really true thing comes up, they lose. So they are scared. So to me, the people, South and North, including me and including the over here, that is not that important factor. Living standard doesn't matter. Anyway, impossible to measure the living standard. So somebody who doesn't want a reunification excuse, yeah, let's wait until level same. To me, then maybe false the theology. So this is another one. The R said, wait until we build NK same level. So that's my point. Thank you.
Well, okay,
Yeah,
so
but
can I respond, Jenny?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right that there are a lot of people in North Korea that are close to the elite. They get their free free housing, free medicine, but that's not the majority of the country. That's only the elite in Pyongyang. And I think that you can't have a functioning country when you have the southern half with high living standards and lower and the upper half, the northern half with low living standards. So that's why you have to somewhat equalize it. But you're talking about the heart, and in the heart, the people are different. That you have the people in the north who worship Kim Il Sung, and the people in the south who do not. So you have to somehow bridge that. So either the people in the north will open their eyes and say, "Oh, maybe Kim Il Sung is not the savior that we were taught," or maybe the people in the south will say, "Oh, he was a great Korean warrior who fought against those Japanese those colonialists, right? That and actually acknowledge that 1937 Battle of Bochombo, right? So there is, so the heart is not quite there, right? So that's why it's going to have to take a lot of time to bridge the gaps that have formed between the Korean people in the north and the Korean people in the south. But I think the Korean people can do it. It's just going to take time. It's not going to be overnight. And you are correct that prior to the 1980s, the Miracle on the Han, Korea had higher living standard than the South. South Korea was a very, very poor country. that what is now the was it the Chegachong, that river in Seoul that they've made into a beautiful tourist area, the
Han River? Han River?
You are
I think
frozen.
we
that used to
lost
be
Al.
sewer water, right? So you had open sewer in the city of. Oh, you lost me?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah, 2
back.
minutes,
That's
2
it.
seconds.
Okay.
You're back.
Yeah. So I don't know if you heard that. That I agree that prior to the miracle in the Han in the 1980s, South Korea was much poorer than North Korea, but that's not the case today. So we have to deal with what's today, not what was 40 years ago.
Yeah, we have a lot of gap between North and South Korea. There's no doubt about it. And it will take decades to have a more desirable unification. True, but we need to go through that process. But through that process, how North and South Korea will work together, understanding different ideologies and then lifestyle, and then how. Yeah, I mean, have to bring out the common kind of a goal they set together. But North Korea, especially, they are really built up and independent fighter because they really don't like the Japanese imperialism, which I'm in the same boat. And during the Japanese 36 years of Japanese colonialism, there are a lot of people in order to survive, I guess, and lots of people become also collaborators. They are obviously for more money grabbers, and they build up their own business, and they got all the benefits of their life living. And that is between after the liberation and if those are 3 years ago, time before Korean War and even after liberation. And those collaborators, eventually they really hold their power and then build up their power and prosperity. And then throughout the 70 years, there's always a group that collaborators power and non-collaborators who are more independent fighter spirit. And that's still going on. And then on the Yoon government, Yoon is a collaborator, I would say so. He is with that side. So nowadays, frequent demonstration, weekly basis, they are really for independent, I'm not saying fighter, but yes, Korean democracy and then Korean independence, not related with the Japanese colonialism, because the Japanese, again, they start having changed their relationship and get the benefit from the Yoon's leadership. And that's what we very much worry about it. And so with the Yoon government and unification, it'll be long way to go. And we have built up until the Moon government, but now everything goes back and a very difficult situation now.
I just might mention my experience in Vietnam. I went to Vietnam with my friends for the first time in 2005. So that was 30 years after the US had abandoned Vietnam, basically. We were sitting in a plaza eating ice cream, and there was a man who walked up to me, and he had a uniform. So I think he may have been a police officer in that town. And he spoke English to me. And so he had apparently worked with the US military when they were in Vietnam. And we chatted a little bit, and then he said, are you going to stay around here? And I said, no, my friends and I are going to take a train into Ho Chi Minh City this evening. And he looked at me and he said, Saigon. And I said, yes, Saigon. So he was trying to correct me because he didn't want it called Ho Chi Minh City, even though it had been called that for 30 years. He wanted it to be called what it was called when it was South Vietnam. And what that suggests to me, well, the other thing is, there are people who are still fighting the Civil War here in the United States after 150 or more years. So what I was going to say with regard to South Vietnam was, it may take generations living and dying and, generations coming to the fore that don't remember any of this, didn't live through any of this, and weren't even hearing stories about it from their parents, for them finally to get a heart for reunification. But the Civil War situation in the United States suggests even after 150 years or more, there is still division in significant ways. So even to hope for reunification in Korea is a nice thought. It's worth working towards. And at the same time, it will take its own time. Oh,
Please, Hazel, welcome.
I had a couple of points. One of them, Doug just talked about the Civil War. When somebody talked about this, what do you do with the I guess it was Al, with the statues and so on. Of course, we're dealing with that right now. And I don't know about difference in basic culture between North Korea and South Korea, but of course in the United States, they really are almost like two different countries. There was a slavery issue and the prejudice, which was at both ends of the game, I think, both North and South. It just, we didn't really, I don't think we've even really tried to do anything to unify. The religion is different. There was migration later, I think, in the early 20th century to better jobs in the US, but the blacks were made to work on the plantations as sharecroppers, so they were stuck. So we're still not integrated, and especially now with the presidential election coming up, it seems like it's getting worse in many ways. But the other thing I wanted to say, I'm sorry that somebody just wanted to talk. I just want to say how much I get out of these discussions that I attend, because occasionally I don't have to, but people find out I've been involved with some Korean peace activities, not much, but lobbying as such. And so they'll want to know why I'm doing it. And, one of the issues that's hard to explain is, people think there is peace now between the two countries, and they don't know it's an armistice. And I try to say as little as possible so I don't say anything wrong. But the issue that Al was covering here, supplemented by the discussion that back and forth, is really helpful to me. So I just wanted to say that. That's it.
That's great. Let's go ahead and welcome Nami real quick, and then Xinhua, is that okay?
I just wanted to say thank you all for this lively discussion. It's been really educational for me. This is a place where we don't get to learn much in the US. And part of the reason that I joined this group is because of Christine On's emphasis on connection, and if we, the grassroots idea of if we could meet North Koreans on a human level, I think this process could potentially move faster than you think if humans can connect at a human level without the politics.
That's powerful, Nami. Xinhua.
Yeah, I think that will be the best way, because human level, we meet the people in North Korea, getting to know more deeper, and that way as much more faster than any politicians do, and then according to their policy. And what I learned from other people who visited North Korea, they have a totally new, they bring their total new knowledge of North Korea. And I've never been to North Korea, so that's why I would like to go to North Korea. I would like to experience in that land, because North Korean people is more genuine in comparison with the South Koreans, more sophisticated, and then they have more manipulative somehow in their life skill. So that's totally different too. And I think it's a matter of how we understand the truth of the history. Because we learn history and through the school and whatever the resources we have, but some resources are not telling the truth. But once we learn about the truth of the history, what's really happened at that time with the more various multi factors involved, then we get more clear picture. That's happening, I think, in South Korea and the United States, the same thing. Politicians use that distorted history and then play with based on the distorted history to get their political power. But same thing in the South Korea, because we have a different government. They always use the wrong history, distortion of history to keep their power. That happening. So sometimes in the United States, yes, they have a strong ally with the South Korea and then different government leaders. And then sometimes the United States use that, I'm not saying collaborate, they working together, the government who has also run based on the distorted history, and then North Korea as the enemy, and South Korea, those who has the strong democratic movement, they labeled as communist. So we lose good people. So I think the same thing in America, because once we learn about the Black Afro-American history, we didn't know about but the more we learn about their history, then how much the United States in the past has done really wrong toward the Afro-Americans and as well as other ethnic groups. So it's a matter of education. It's a matter of learning the truth in our history, in our life.
Thank you all for what you've brought to this discussion tonight. Al, great framework for conversation. Everyone, thank you for participation, for giving back. I loved the connections that were drawn toward the US as well at the end there, because we are in the middle of culture wars, which, like you were saying, Nami, when we approach one another, when we connect on human levels to understand from each other's perspective where we're at, then we find the shared ground, and that's where we collaborate together and we slowly begin to transform what was just an impossible conflict into something that we can live with, and people that we can live with, and a community that we can build together. So anyway, let's keep doing the work day by day with our neighbors and across the ocean. So sending love to all of you. Thank you.
Night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me, Jenny.
Thank you, Al.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Al.
Thanks, Al.